All right, welcome back to another edition of the Kvetching Draftniks, I guess, radio show, podcast, whatever you want to call it. I'm Scott Karasik. I'm joined by Ethan Hammerman, as usual. Today we're going to go over mainly wide receivers. Probably a couple of tight ends are going to get thrown in there on accident. Slash, there's guys who kind of fit that either or. Aaron Hernandez, Tony Gonzalez, Marcus Colston, kind of, are they a wide receiver? Are they a tight end? That Tim Wright kind of mold that I'll throw in there. Because I did have one that kind of reminded me of Tim Wright. So we're going to go ahead and get started basically with a quick overview of who are your top five as far as your wide receivers go.
Yeah. First of all, got my brand working because I'm actually wearing my day job sweatshirt right now, and I got glasses Twitter also on point. So making it work, even though I feel a little bit tired. And a Merry Christmas, by the way, to all those who celebrate. Neither of us do, but everybody else does. So Merry Christmas to y'all. Yeah. So we were talking about it earlier. Like I kind of have a working top five right now. Mostly, there are four receivers in this class that I think are surefire first-round picks, and then sort of a fringe five spot where there are a bunch of guys who can sort of fill that role in. And one thing I do have also that we'll go into is I have comparisons for every single major receiver in this class for the most part at this point, which is great because the way that I use comparisons is in terms of how I can see them winning at the next level. So it's a style comparison for me. I just want to make sure I tweet. I want to make sure I tweet out this link before we get everything started. But yeah, I think that this is a good class. I mean, we said it earlier on the show that this year's receiver class, by the way, has been just amazing. Probably a record-setting receiver class, and I don't think we can say enough about how special this class has been. Next year's class, probably not quite as good off the bat, but there's a lot of talent there, a lot of depth, a lot of solid twos and threes down the road, I think. Um, so I think overall, like this class has a lot of potential, but in terms of sort of like the guys that I think are a step above everyone else in this group, I think Devin Funchess comes to mind immediately. He's sort of my working number one guy right now, although I have a feeling that he might not end up there after the process is over. I think that I could see Devontae Parker or Amari Cooper sort of jumping him. I think those three are in a tier by themselves, though, in terms of sort of what they bring to the table. I think Kevin White from West Virginia is another first-round pick for me, but he's slightly below the other three, just because I'm not entirely sure that he has as unique a skill set as the other three. I think Devontae Parker might be the most physically talented receiver in the group. Funchess might be the most projectable, and Amari Cooper might be the most explosive. And I think White is maybe a step behind all three of those in all those categories, but he's really, really good in certain areas as well. So he gets his due as well. And then number five spot, I mean, Ty Montgomery is someone I know a lot of people aren't quite as high on as me, but I think once you get past the top four, you look at guys who maybe win in more specific ways, who might have more weaknesses. I think that when it's all said and done, Duke Williams from Auburn is going to be a really strong candidate for my number five spot. To be honest, right now, I still have this niggling feeling that Ty Montgomery is going to go in the first round. I have a late first, early second on him, so sort of a fringe grade on him right now.
So your
But
top
I
five
think
is
that
Funches and Bunches.
my top five is Funches, Parker, Cooper, White. No, Funches, Parker, Cooper, Gap, White, Gap, and then I would say Montgomery right now is my five, and he's in a group with about at least three or four other receivers who we'll talk about on the show tonight. We'll talk about all these receivers more as well, but that's sort of the group that I see right now as my top five.
Because my top five is a little different. And it might just be because I'm holding Rashad Green a little bit higher than a lot of people are. Um, I really like what I see with him. Again, I've got Amari Cooper. To me, Amari Cooper is far and away the best receiver in the class. No questions asked. He's the best receiver. Fastest, probably the fastest, the quickest, best route runner. Great hands, can be used over the middle. He's a tough SOB. He's just not the biggest guy, but he's still a solid size. He's like, I want to say he's like 6'1", maybe like 210. So I mean, he's not horrible size. He reminds me of a faster, maybe like a poor man's in terms of size, Julio Jones is what I see there, or like a faster Marvin Harrison, really, more than anything else. Rashad Green, I really like the way he plays. He gets off blocks well. He reminds me of another guy who came out of FSU and Anquan Bolden. I do like Kevin White, but I don't like him as
that.
huh?
We'll talk about that. Green, Bolden, I don't see that whatsoever.
I see it a little bit better, but I'm just going based on every time on a third down, he runs that quick underneath route and he gets hit like that. That's Anquan Bolden every day. That's where he's going to win in the NFL, the same way Bolden wins. Sometimes you look where guys win, which I'm kind of embracing that this year after seeing the Falcons not embrace it at all. So I'm embracing it like, where does this guy win? Where does this guy win? And where he wins matters more than, overall physical comparisons and that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of focusing where these guys win for my comparisons. Funchess reminds me a lot of Marcus Colston in terms of where he wins. He's my number 3. After watching Colston destroy Atlanta basically for the better part of a decade, it's nice to see, I don't know, I'd like to see Atlanta pick him up. If Atlanta spent their second round pick on Devin Funchess, I wouldn't complain. Because I think that's about where he's going to go. Devontae Parker, I'm not as high on him as you are. I just don't see a lot of concentration with him at times. He does have some bad drops. But he's still an extremely good receiver and runs great routes. And then Kevin White and Tyler Lockett, I've got tied for my 5th spot. I really like what Tyler Lockett brings. He's fast as hell. He's a great returner. Reminds me a lot of Deshaun Jackson coming out. He might not weigh more than like 165 pounds soaking wet, but fast as hell.
This is actually perfect because you mentioned 2 players who I think we sort of fall into some weird territory with when it comes to comparisons. I personally think that when you look at guys like Deshaun Jackson and Anquan Bolden, you can't compare them to players coming out unless the player has something that is absolutely transcendent. Because even when you saw Deshaun Jackson at Cal, you knew that he had a special separation, a special gear that, to be honest, you sort of try to look for in other guys when it's not there. And my comparison for Tyler Lockett is somebody who was compared a lot to Deshaun Jackson for much of the draft process when he was coming out, but he did not live up to the hype, and that was Titus Young, the former Lions guy. Because I think Lockett is really good. I think his footwork's really good, but he doesn't have quite the explosiveness that Deshaun Jackson has. And to sort of put that upon Tyler Lockett, I think is a little bit of an unfair expectation.
Jeremy Maclin.
Maybe. I could see that a little bit more, but I think there's an even more dangerous speed guy in this class, and that's Phillip Dorsett from Miami, who, in my mind, is going to run 4.3 flat, if not better, at the combine. And you already know immediately one way he's going to win. He's just going to burn anyone who tries to match with one-on-one. Like, automatically it takes the top off of defense, and I think that gets sort of lost in translation. What?
He'd be good for that slant route, too, though, because he's electric after he gets the ball in his hands.
That too. I mean, my comparison for him is T.Y. I think that he reminds me of Hilton coming out a little bit. But him and Lockett, I mean, I think that people sort of, if a guy's not Deshaun Jackson, that's fine. Just don't expect them to put up Deshaun Jackson numbers, because we saw it in Philadelphia this year that, they did suffer a bit losing Deshaun Jackson, even though people sort of downplayed it. I mean, Jerry Maclin put up great stats, but he wasn't respected the way Deshaun Jackson was respected in Philly. Now, your Rashad Green comparison to Bolden, Rashad Green isn't breaking tackles and just beasting people in the open field because that's how Bolden wins. Bolden can't separate. Bolden is slow as molasses, but he's able to throw guys off of him on a regular basis and make these huge contested catches that, to be frank, I mean, I don't think Green can do that. I think Green is probably a number 2 or number 3 option at the next level. My comparison for him, and if Kyle Posey is listening, he's going to love this, is former San Diego Charger Eric Parker, who, just because I think he's the kind of person who could masquerade as a top option on a team where they don't have enough talent to have a real number 1 receiver, but he's going to do his thing. He's going to make some catches at the next level. He's going to be a contributor, but I'm not sure that I can see him being a number 1 option on a good football team in the NFL. Because I think that if you're trying to sort of depend on him to be the guy who's you're running your offense through, you're going to have some problems because he's going to have issues separating against faster, more powerful cornerbacks to the next level.
I think that's fair.
Now, I think that one guy who you described to a T is Devontae Parker. Because my comparison for Devontae Parker, which is one of my favorite ones, is Braylon Edwards. You see the same issues in terms of he has some issues with the concentration, but the vertical ability, the ability off the snap, everything screams to me Braylon Edwards. Braylon Edwards was a really, really good receiver for a substantial amount of time in the NFL, especially when he had a quarterback who was getting him the ball down the field. I think Devontae Parker could go where Braylon Edwards probably should have gone in his draft. Should he have been a top 5 receiver, a top 5 player overall? Probably not, but Devontae Parker strikes me as someone who has that type of potential, and I just think they play the same way. I think they're clones. So I think that that's one comparison that I'm very fond of, the Devontae Parker-Braylon Edwards comparison.
I'd agree with that, and I think because of Braylon Edwards, he won't go in the top 15.
Well, then, are the Vikings top 15?
The Vikings, as of right now, they are in the top 15. However,
I think that's a possibility.
It could go as low as 15. So
I could see the Vikings taking Devontae Parker and pairing him back with Teddy.
Based on the Teddy connection, that would be the only thing I could agree with. And even then, I don't understand why Teddy doesn't use Cordero Patterson more. I don't know what the disconnect is there.
Yeah. I agree, and I think that there also we've seen some regression in terms of Greg Jennings. When you're focusing on Charles Johnson, who, regardless of what metrics Twitter says, is slow, as your number 1 option, you're not really going to take the top off a defense. Cordero could do that, but clearly there's a lack of trust there. They just switched offenses, didn't they? They switched this year. So maybe that's part of the issue. Because I know in New England they had questions about him learning new offenses.
They did, but Cordero Patterson, if I was Teddy, I would pull Cordero off to the side and be like, hey, you and me and Charles Johnson, just get the 3 of us all on the same page. Because you've got 2 6'2", 210-pounders who... I know you say Charles Johnson is slow. I don't see a slow receiver. I just see a guy who takes a minute to get up to gear. And once he gets up to gear, he's fast. He's a strider more than anything else. But still, I see 2 extremely athletic receivers who you could destroy a defense with if you really wanted to, as long as you're on the same page, as long as they're running the right routes. So you can get on the same page with them, run those option routes, do what, Matt Ryan does, and basically sit in the wide receiver room, what basically any good quarterback does. Peyton Manning will sit there. He'll sit there in the wide receiver room with his guys. You'll see Tom Brady sit in the wide receiver room with his guys and go over these option routes with them. And that's what Teddy needs to do in Minnesota if he's not already doing it. And I think he needs to get Cordero involved more because I think they could use that pick on something way more valuable than a wide receiver for them.
It's funny though because I don't think that they need a lot in that team. And we'll cover linebackers later. I think a linebacker is something that they probably could use, but we've seen that you can get a starting caliber linebacker in rounds 2 or 3. In this class, to me, I mean, receiver seems to be the obvious sort of like pressure point that could put them over the top. Because you get a really good number one option. You get Amari Cooper in Minnesota. You get a Funchess in Minnesota. Heck, you get a Kevin White in Minnesota. It just gives you a completely different component to your offense that Teddy hasn't had this year. And, maybe you can scheme in some different types of plays for Cordero Patterson. I mean, personally, I would love to see him line up as a running back some plays.
I'm
I'd
just
love to
going
see
with
him
how
line up as a
Khalil has.
slot back some plays. Just get him the ball in space and let him do things.
I'm just going based on how bad Khalil has been, though. Like Khalil has been moving
That's
the
true.
left guard kind of bad.
But I also think that you can get a tackle later in the draft, and especially in this class because I'm really not high in this tackle class. If you get even if you get a project guy like Clemmings from Pitt, and we'll talk about him next week because I think we're going to talk about offensive tackles next week. Uh, you're still playing the waiting game with all of these guys because they're all going to need time to bake. So I'm definitely a little bit unsure that it might be smarter if you want the instant sort of impact. And I think Minnesota could be a playoff team next year if they get that instant impact, even in that tough division. I think that they should go for a big play receiver. I think it would make sense.
It does make sense. I mean, it definitely does. It wouldn't hurt them to go with the big play receiver, unless a guy like Landon Collins slips and they can go with the badass safety combination.
That would be a great safety combination. That would be fun to watch. They would play off each other so well. And I think that, to be honest, he will be there because, as many wise men have said, we always overrate the top safety every single year because of that one year where Mark Barron went top 10. We always overrate the top safety. Probably won't go as high this year. So Landon Collins should be there. So Devin Funchess. Now, sort of shifting because I think he's been a very polarizing prospect this year for a lot of people. My thing with Devin Funchess is when I'm evaluating receivers, I try to take skills over usage. I think market share matters, and I think that, to be fair to Funchess, he sort of was the focal point of that offense when he was healthy. But to me, the big thing is that the guy has a special skill set. He can separate off the line of scrimmage. He's huge. He has a great wingspan. We already know how he can win in multiple ways because he can get down the field, and his footwork is awesome. My comparison for him, and this is a bit of a lofty one for sure, I see Vincent Jackson with Aaron Hernandez's feet. Because I think you could line him up anywhere, and I think he can get off of any jam. I think that he can cut really, really smoothly. And I just see someone who, in my mind, is probably a top 10 player in this class in terms of just like pure planet player thought processes.
You should
Like,
watch
he just
years
has
3 to 5.
everything you need.
You should watch years 3 to 5 of Marcus Colston. I think that's going to be his best comparison.
And I don't honestly, Marcus Colston was a really good receiver for a long time. So that's not a bad sort of aspirational thing to be. But I think that, and you'll have to forgive me because I don't know that much about Nollins. So maybe if one of the Saints fans could jump in on Twitter, did Colston run a lot of routes in New Orleans?
His first 2 years, he didn't. He ran a lot of like skinny post, seam type routes that you'd run with a tight end, only he ran them from the slot. The same kind of stuff Jimmy Graham ran last year. And then he was basically a big slot receiver. The big reason why Colston and Graham worked so well together is because they were big slot receivers, and then you had fast, speedy guys on the outside like Stills and Meacham and all that going on. Sean Payton's a brilliant guy because he understands the four verticals concept and runs it all the time. I don't think he's a great route runner, Colston, but he's a route runner who understands how to get open in the right spaces. He doesn't have sharp cuts. He doesn't have perfect footwork. What he does have is the ability to read a defensive back and see when to cut. Even if his cut's not the best, he knows when to cut.
That's interesting. because someone else who that also definitely holds true for, and one of the guys who I think is going to be a late riser in this process is Duke Williams out of Auburn. He's someone who sees the field really well. And my comparison for him actually is someone who's kind of really quietly broken out this year and become a really good receiver. And that's Mohamed Sanu on the Bengals. Like very quietly, like you haven't really heard a lot about him because the entire AFC North has been pretty good, and he's overshadowed by Jeremy Hill and Gio Bernard and AJ Green. But Mohamed Sanu put up some really, really nice numbers this year. If he was on a team, other than the Bengals, of course, I'm not so convinced that he couldn't be a decent number one receiver.
If you put him on Carolina, where they don't have a number one right now, he puts up 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns easy.
Yeah. No, and I think that Duke Williams, similar type of athlete, similar ability to read defenses, in my opinion. And honestly, that's why, like right now, I'm second on Duke Williams, but he might move into that late first the more I watch because he's really impressed me. And I have him slightly higher than Sammy Coates, although I happen to like both. And I'm grabbing some water, so you can keep talking, but I'll be right back.
I haven't seen a ton of Duke Williams myself. One of the guys that I personally do enjoy watching is Sammy Coates. I like that Sammy Coates decided to declare. He's one of those guys with a ton of speed and agility. He runs good routes for the 3 routes that they actually have him run, which are skinny post, 9, and then the fade. I just wish they'd run more routes. Let's see. Ty Montgomery. Ethan will be back in a minute. We'll go over Ty Montgomery. I see a lot of talent with him as more of that. Oh, man, we said this. But Ethan, who was the guy I compared Montgomery to right before we got on air?
You compared him. I don't remember. I know who I compared him to. I don't remember who you compared him to.
Yeah, you said Crabtree.
It was somebody who was.
Mine was Brian Hartline / Michael Jenkins / like mediocre guys who wound up having solid careers.
Yeah, I'm a little higher on Montgomery than most. Because the thing with Montgomery is that he's just so good after the catch. And Crabtree, like, not the best vertical threat. He's not going to be the guy who always gets open down the field and makes crazy plays. He can do it on occasion, but he's not the best route runner. He wins after the catch. Every time I've seen him make a big play, or most times, it's been after the catch. And I think that Montgomery is a fighter like Crabtree. What?
I was going to say, Ty Montgomery being used more like a Wes Welker type, just with more size. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
Ty Montgomery, the ironic thing is I think the Saints could have taken Ty Montgomery this year and used him like they would have used Cooks when he was healthy. And I don't think they would have been too far off.
Well, they've just been using Cooks like a faster version of Kenny Stills. So it's not like there was really... I mean, they didn't really use...
Didn't they run him over the middle and try to get it to him short and make things happen after the catch? It's what I saw when I was watching. Maybe it was in the preseason.
Yeah, on slants and open zones, yeah, but as far as like running him over the middle, like 15-yard ends, they weren't doing that.
Yeah, but I definitely like Montgomery a lot. I think that there are some issues in his game for sure. I'm not sure he's the best translation to be a number one at the next level, but I do see enough there where I want to give him a chance. I will bet on him. He's the kind of guy who I would bet on to do big things. Because everything I've heard, the guy's a really hard worker. He's really explosive. He's great on special teams. I just don't see a lot of reason to doubt him at this point as a pro. Now, the funny thing is that we mentioned Crabtree because I think also my Amari Cooper comparison is I think he's going to be the guy that we all wanted Justin Blackmon to be coming out of Oklahoma State. And, people forget with Justin Blackmon that I mean, I think that he sort of like in Jacksonville became better after the catch, but Blackman also had this deep ability, and the game that really sort of like brought him onto the scene in college was when he burned Prince Amakamara, who was considered a top 10 pick at the time, even though Amakamara slipped a little bit and ended up not being quite as good as hyped. That was sort of what really brought Blackman onto the scene. Amakamara was still a 4-4 guy. He was so fast. Um, I think that Cooper has that ability. Now, I also think that the biggest thing with Cooper is after the catch, I think he's amazing in open space. I'm not entirely sure about his tackle breaking. I haven't seen a ton of it because his size is not the biggest dude. He's big enough, but he's not the biggest. But I mean, everything else is there for him to be potentially the top receiver in the class for me. And I think it makes sense that like these top three guys, the guys who I've compared them to, like Braylon Edwards, a good Justin Blackman when he was considered to be a top 5 player, or top 5 type prospect, and with funches like Vincent Jackson, like these are all number 1 receivers, like undoubted number 1 receivers who win in unique ways. And that's why I've elevated them in my mind, and that's how sort of I see the value sort of being distributed. Because to me, to be a first round pick, I need to see that you can do something that immediately makes me think of a top player in the league at their position. And all three of those guys do things that make me think that.
I agree. Justin Blackman minus the off-field issues, though, because Amari Cooper definitely doesn't have nearly the off-field issues that Blackman has.
Yeah. And now, granted, I wouldn't take Amari Cooper with like the top 2 picks in the draft. That's a little bit overboard for me.
He's a top 10 guy, though.
Maybe. I mean, I could see, with the way that this receiver class is structured, I could see them all going pretty highly. I could see the Raiders deciding, you know what, we just want Amari Cooper. We like him with the car. I could see well, actually not the Jaguars, but I could see the Browns take a receiver in this group. Because they have 2 first-round picks, right? Because they have the Bills.
They do have 2 first-round
I
picks.
could see them. I could see them taking one of the receivers when they have a chance because, you know, after Josh Gordon, if one of them slips, they don't have a lot of depth at that position, even if Taylor Gabriel is, like, not terrible.
Well, they've got
I can see them taking that chance.
19th, the way it sits right now.
I could also see
They can realistically take 2 wide receivers.
Could.
They could take a big guy, that big slot like Funchess at like 19. And then they could also take a like legitimate number 1 kind of guy like Kevin White, or or a Devontae Parker at that first one. That number 14. I'm not a huge Devontae Parker fan, but I could see him being taken at 14.
Yeah, no, with White, though, like, I like him. I just don't think he does anything quite as well as the other guys. Like, my thought with him is Cody Latimer from last year.
Cody Latimer is a hell of a player, but he also got put into the perfect situation for a guy that needs time to develop. Because, I mean, how many times are you going to be behind Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, and Wes Welker as a rookie?
Yeah, and he still hasn't even gotten his real opportunity yet. He's still waiting for his time. So, we'll see. But I think that, in retrospect, Latimer's a guy who should have gone in the first round, but he didn't because of lack of hype. So that's why I sort of think White fits there well. I think they have similar wins similarly, too.
Mm. All right, sorry, I'm gonna mute this guy on Twitter. Guy trying to argue with me, saying that Atlanta's offensive line is horrible, calling the Falcons right tackle bad, where I guarantee you the dude hasn't even watched him play.
I'm hot as heck right now. It's really hot in my room. No, but Kevin White is someone like he went to the catch point so well. I love that about him. He's good in a lot of different ways. I don't think he's quite as explosive as the other receivers in the class. I don't think he's quite as unique as the other receivers in the class. I don't get the Larry Fitzgerald comparisons at all. But I think he's good, and I think he's first round good. I just don't think he's like top 15 good, which is fine. Now, Sammy Coates is interesting because he's someone who's gotten a lot of flack recently, but he does one thing that instantly, in my mind, makes him translate well to the NFL, and that is his body positioning on deep balls is phenomenal. There's at least 5 or 6 deep balls that I've seen him just go up and snatch it just because he knows where to position himself, knows how to go up and get it. When you pair that with his physical ability, to me, he's a no-brainer, like, second round pick just so you can send him deep and heave up deep balls to him because he can do that. And then you just build the rest of the receiver out of him from there. Like my comparison for him is Mike Williams in Tampa before he went crazy.
That's actually a pretty good one.
Any other receiver thoughts in terms of, I guess, any like sleepers that you sort of like that no one's talking about? What do you think of Smelter?
Smelter, not my favorite. Um, Great athlete, solid catch, but just not my favorite. Not anywhere close to my favorite. Um, I hate when guys don't know how to run routes. Even the smallest, simplest routes, the dude just doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Like poor foot placement has no, just no. I hate the way he runs routes. I absolutely hate it.
I think you can teach that though, and he has so much talent. It doesn't seem stupid. So I think that like third round, I would take him.
I wouldn't, not even close to that high. Not even close to that high.
Now,
Probably at the absolute highest, fifth round.
it's
Again,
low.
he's an athlete. He's an athlete. He's not a instant starter. He's not a guy who I'm going to come in and say, "Hey, we're going to throw you at the number one receiver and boom, it's your turn to take the you've got to take the overall fucking mantle of our offense." I wouldn't trust him with that. Not right away. He might have a Marcus Colston type career where he starts out as that and just comes out of nowhere, but I don't see that happening with him. I don't see that happening with him at all. He's good, but he's not top 5 round good. You've got to be a damn good player to be in the top 5 rounds. People act like, oh, I'm going to be talking crap about this guy by saying he's a 5th round guy. No, he's a damn good player. He's just not a number one receiver. If I'm going to draft him, it's going to be as a number 2 long-term option. A guy who I'd draft behind, say, a core like Denver, Atlanta, Miami even has a really good core to draft for him to be behind and find a role for him and then let him develop into that number 2 that he's going to be. That's what I see.
It's funny because my top 11 receivers are all second round or better. I have 4 round ones and 7 round 2. So maybe I just like this class more.
You probably do. You probably do like it a lot more than I do.
What do you think about Aguilar from USC?
Take what I just said about Smelter and apply it to him too. If he comes out, that's stupid.
I'm a fan. I think that I have a third on him. He's really explosive, and he reminds me of Bernard Berrien, except I think he could be more consistent.
Bernard Berrien. That's a name I haven't heard in quite a few years.
Yeah, that's my comp for him. I like him. I like Balin Strong. It's another one who I like in this group. I have a late second on him. Um, Tony Lippett is someone who is criminally underrated in this class. I think he's literally been the reason why Connor Cook has looked good this year. I have a second on him. The dude's like really athletic and really impressive too. He's just a really, really impressive player. I think he's someone who's going to get some due closer to the end of the process. But otherwise, I mean, I just think there's a lot of depth in this class. I mean, I've even talked about like some of my sleepers, like the guy, like everything you said about DeAndre Smelter. I think it's the same thing about like Vince Mail from Washington State. Um, Someone who you can develop into someone really good, but might not be there quite yet. So he'd be like my fifth round, like flyer guy. You mentioned Lockett. I like Lockett. Tony Jones from Northwestern, Kyle Prater from Northwestern, both guys I like. I was doing some research for some Bull stuff this weekend. J.J. Wharton from UCF has the best hands I've seen in this class by far. He's someone who's like 6'2", 210, I think. So like he should be getting a chance somewhere. And then you have some of the Baylor guys like Levi Norwood, Antoine Goodley. These are all guys who should go early day 3 and could be contributors.
Wharton, though.
What?
I like Brashad Perriman a lot more than I like Wharton.
It's funny, I'm the opposite. I think Brashad Perriman has some uncorrectable flaws when I watch him play. Is that a comb?
It
Why do you
is.
have a comb?
Because I do.
But anyway, no, Perriman, he's weak at the catch point. He drops way too many passes. I think Wharton's impressed me more every time I've watched. Perriman, it's to me,
Receiver, I'm just saying I like Perriman better.
I think Perriman's Todd Pinkston at the next level. I think he's a weak receiver. He's someone that bad teams talk themselves into being a number 2 when he's really not.
I can understand that one. Now, there's two names that I've heard a lot about where I still haven't really had a good chance to watch them. And I don't think you're a huge fan of one of them, and that's Dorial Green Beckham. I haven't had a lot of chance to watch
I
him.
mean, physically.
And then
And who's the other one?
Stephon, I think you're I feel like I've heard you're a fan of Diggs.
Well, I'll tackle Diggs first. Diggs, my
Okay.
comparison for him is New York Giants Steve Smith. I think he's number 2 at the next level. And I think that a lot of the luster on him sort of like wore off as the year went on. He really didn't show to be that explosive. He didn't show to be that great with the ball in his hands. He doesn't do anything that's special. So I think he's like a day 3 guy to me. And I think others sort of agree. I think people came down on him a lot as the year went on. So I think that's probably fair value for him right now. Now, Dorial Green Beckham will not be on my draft board this year. I will not be ranking him. I will not be scouting him. I will not be even touching him. If I was on a team, he would not be on my board. He's already gotten multiple second chances. He has not made anything of himself. He is a mental mess, and somebody else can take that risk on him. And you know what? Maybe they'll do something. Maybe he'll do something. But I'm not going to touch him. So I will not be ranking or discussing Dorial Green Beckham any of my boards this year. It's just not going to happen. I've heard too many bad things.
That's pretty harsh, but fair, but still harsh. I personally don't want to scout him, but it sounds like you've got not just a black dot, but one of those like big like redaction pens, and have redacted him completely from your watch list. Like one of those big fat black chisel markers, and have just taken it. Here's
I
his
don't
name.
think it's any different. Like, I think it's happened before. I don't think it's any different from a lot of sort of like similar situations. And I don't think that this is the case. Like last year, I was a huge Chantrell Henderson fan. Chantrell Henderson, like, he was lazy, but he hadn't gotten in trouble 3 times for 3 violent crimes, and had gotten off hook for all of them. And not every time he got a second chance had failed. This is someone who has a repeated pattern of issues with his behavior. So, and we don't even know if Green Beckham is going to come out. I mean, I assume he is. Has he officially announced yet? I assume he's coming out, but
I think he's claimed that he's coming out.
well, we'll see. But I'm not going to be touching him unless I hear direct a team wants to associate with him, and we're talking about like realistic mocks. I'm mocking him. He's just not someone who I'm going to be considering as a prospect this year. Like, he might be, from what I've heard, he might have the worst off-field resume of a wide receiver in the draft since Ray Caruth came out of Colorado. And we all saw what happened with Ray Caruth. Not that Green Beckham would kill somebody, but Trump, like, the repeated issues with no remorse for his actions is very concerning to me.
So you're saying he's a sociopath?
I'm saying that rumors of sociopathy dropped Derek Rogers a few years ago, and I think that there's a chance that Green Beckham might have a similar. His symptoms seem similar, so I won't be touching him.
I can agree with that. If you, that's a horrible, horrible way to look at that. But
I mean, there are some other guys in college football who probably. I'm a lenient person. I believe in second chances. I've been saying that Ray Rice should serve as punishment, but then if he wants to get back in the league, I wouldn't be opposed to giving him a second chance after he served his punishment. Like, Green Beckham's gotten in trouble multiple times before. Like, if it was only one issue, I would say, maybe you get this guy into counseling and maybe you try to get him help. But this is a guy who's gotten in trouble 3 or 4 times. So clearly it's a pattern, and clearly it's something that you can't just, he's not going to change unless something drastic happens. So I'm just, it's sort of like fool me once, shame on you, fool me 4 times. Why even risk it?
I agree with you there. All right, so I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I like to look at productive wide receivers at the college level and see how they project for you. Because I like productive wide receivers. I haven't been a fan of Nelson Aguilar, but have you gotten a chance to see Vince Mail? Extremely productive.
I'm a fan of his. If we're talking about productive receivers who I'm also a fan of, Ezel Ruffin from San Diego State. Watching his tape, he is fun to watch. He has some Antonio Brown to his game, and it's really, really fun to watch. I would take him in the 3rd probably. And the guy there's another receiver, it's a small school guy, I do not remember his name. I mean, Devontae Davis is somebody who I think we've talked about before, but he's someone who I really like. Trey McBride from William & Mary, that's his name, is somebody who I think could be a really, really good number 2 or number 3 of the NFL right away. He reminds me of Ruben Randall. So he's somebody else who I would keep an eye on. He's productive. Yeah. Those are 2 guys where I like. And then I guess another guy we haven't even brought up, I completely forgot about him, Justin Hardy from ECU. Is somebody who he is the most productive receiver. And I'm a fan of his. My comparison for him is Donald Driver.
That just, wow, right on the head. Because
They
he's
do the same thing. They just get open
underrated,
and they just catch everything.
productive and underrated and catches everything. Just amazing. Just amazing. Productive, underrated, and does what he needs to do. I'm a fan of Hardy. The guy who I don't think you said yet was Jalen Strong out of Arizona
I
State.
said him. I said I
You
liked
said
him as he's like a late second to me. He reminds me of a slightly worse version of Keenan Allen.
I can agree with that.
And honestly, I'm souring a little bit on Keenan the more I watch him. He hasn't been as good this year. Part of that might be because Rivers has regressed more than people want to admit, but I think also Allen, we went about maybe a little later than he should have. He should have gone mid-second, but I don't think the valuation there was as off as we thought it was.
So, what are your thoughts on how do I put this? On a guy who's slow but slow straight line speed, quick overall, basically Wes Welker and Jamison Crowder.
I mean, I think he's an undrafted free agent. I liked him on tape, but I don't see like if you're going to take a guy who sort of can do the same thing. I mean, we have even talked about like Mario Alford from West Virginia who might run 4.3. We haven't talked about Devin Smith, who's probably a top 15 receiver for me. He's going to be a third round pick.
Has to declare.
Devin Smith is a senior.
He's a senior.
Yeah.
Why do I feel like
And
I've
he's
seen
gotten some
him
buzz recently too. He's in my top 15 for sure. I just don't sort of see. I'm just not entirely sure like why you would take Crowder over some of these guys. I mean, he's productive, but I'm just not sure what he does that's like special that other receivers can't do.
I can understand that. Devin Smith is definitely an underrated kind of guy right now too. But how much of that is him being good, and how much of that is him being good with Cardale Jones?
Devin Smith has always been good. He's just really good at going vertical. He's better than Philly Brown was last year. And from what I heard, he might end up going a lot higher than him too.
Because I mean, the thing is, he's got two really good games this year against really good competition, and then other than that, he's just kind of disappeared. So is he a guy who steps up? Is he a guy that just gets on the right same page? Or is it 2 to 3 good catches that really boost him up on those games? That's my question for him. Why does he disappear against teams like Virginia Tech?
He's done it. Also, Virginia Tech was against probably the best quarterback prospect in the country, regardless of year, in Fuller. So I don't really fault him too badly for that.
Well, then how about Indiana or Penn State or Maryland or Rutgers? Being held to 1-2 catches.
I mean, part of that might be.
I gotta go watch these games because there's something missing there. There's got to be something.
I mean, I think it needs to be worked on a little bit, but the talent's all there. And, you know, in the spread offense, it's going to be something different every week. And the quarterbacks are so good at running it. Like, they spread the ball around. And they also take a lot of the touches. So I don't really fault him too much for those. I think he's someone who will test well. And teams are going to like his attitude. And I think he'll end up going in the third round.
Well, yeah. I mean, if he goes in the third round, that's about right. Because the way he looks on paper right now, he looks a lot like Terrence Williams. I haven't seen him. I personally have not gone and watched Devin Smith play. So I'm just going based on player, based on size, based on estimated speed comparisons. I'm seeing a Terrence Williams kind of fit. I'll go watch him play. Unfortunately, I might have already poisoned my own mind with that comparison, but If a guy who goes deep 90% of the time, that's his route. I mean, just watching him right now, it looks like that's his route every single play. Go deep, go deep, go deep, go deep, go deep, go deep, kind of thing.
I just keep seeing good hands when he does that, though, so I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I think that overall, though, just if you look at some of these names, like, this is just such a deep receiver class. There's so many options. It's kind of crazy. I mean, last year had a great class, but this year also it's just so many good receivers in college football right now.
See, when you listed Smelter, I think you missed the real best receiver at Georgia Tech. Best receiver, period, at Georgia Tech right now, and that's Darren Waller.
Yeah, but Waller looked awful this year. Like, I think that the project that you think Smelter is Waller.
That's more on Thomas than on Waller. There were times when Thomas missed him wide open. Wide open. Shouldn't have missed him at all. Missed him wide open. I like Thomas. Not Thomas. I like Waller, and I like Justin Thomas, but some of the spaces that he had, and just the ball sailing right over his head, him going, "Oh, great." And looking back, I can understand why he wasn't busting his ass for Thomas on those routes. You put him in an NFL camp. This is why I was saying some of these guys are more like tight ends. He's a guy who could be used like a Tim Wright and be very effective. Very effective. And probably is an undrafted free agent.
You may as well take the risk.
Huh?
Take the risk, why not?
I think that's what Tim Wright was, yeah. Yeah,
he was a wide receiver who was moved over.
He was a bigger receiver who went undrafted, who ran like a 4.6. But once they used him at a tight end, he was a mismatch. And now New England's using him as a mismatch in the red zone, and he looks perfect for that system. And he's got no pressure on him because in New England, he's like the 8th option in that offense.
What's your over-under for how many receivers get drafted this year?
I think the average per year is like 26, I want to say. I would put my over-under closer to 30 this year.
Yeah, I would say like 32.
Like, all right, from 2000, the 5-year average is 31. So I'd put my over-under at like 35, 36. I just think there's that many that'll get drafted.
I think 36 is fair. This is just a really good class. Like,
I mean, even that guy from Wisconsin, Whitewater, was really good the other day.
I didn't see him, but I heard he looked good. And, I mean, even the other guy from ECU, Cam Worthy, is really good, too. And I think also, like, there are just a bunch of guys who are talented. Kason Williams, he might have been a first-round pick if he had a good quarterback the past 2 years.
Yeah. We also got another Shipley brother down the pipe.
Yeah, but the Bengals will pick him and he'll do nothing.
The Bengals will take him in the 7th round. He'll be a great slot receiver for like 2 years, and then they'll cut him for another Sanzenbacher.
Pretty much.
Oh, man. I feel like that's what the Bengals do. They always have that white slot receiver who's just really fast, and you don't expect him to be because, well, hate to say it this way, but white guys aren't faster by normal standards. Now, a guy who hasn't really been talked about a lot is Michael Bennett, speaking about white receivers out of Georgia, and I don't understand why. Him and Conley, both those guys, they're both very solid receivers. I mean, I realize Hudson Mason sucks, but you can't penalize his receivers for his bad play. Because those guys know how to get open, especially in the red zone.
I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't seen any of them. So, those are two receivers I did not watch.
I would
Even
recommend watching those two guys. If you watch Georgia film, you'll go, oh my God. Two things will stand out. Oh my God, Hudson Mason is garbage. And then the second thing will be Chris Conley deserved way better than this. Michael Bennett deserved way better than this. Those guys are solid receivers who, let's put it this way, I didn't even realize they were seniors until like the last two games they played. And then another guy who's surprisingly good, who I would be shocked to go super late, is Demir Bird in South Carolina.
Well, that's an interesting case because we talked about how Shaq Rowland got kicked off the team today or yesterday.
It's true. Yes, that's.
He's somebody else who now I can see going out.
Over the past basically 9 years, I was subjected to it. And I say that in a negative way because it kind of was, but I was subjected to it, and I saw a lot of Shaq Rowland, a lot of Demir Bird, a lot of these guys, and Dylan Thompson. These receivers deserved way better than what Dylan Thompson gave them this year. They deserved way better than. Well, I mean, Connor Shaw was pretty good, but they deserved better than what Dylan Thompson gave them. Because Rowland probably could have been a 1,000-yard guy. Bird probably could have been a 1,000-yard guy this year. They're the air it out, deep threat kind of receivers that understand how to burn a defense with good, proper route running on streaks, on slants, on phase, everything. I mean, if you're just looking for a guy to add to your group that's going to be a deep threat, bring in Bird, bring in Shaq Rowland. If you get a chance, bring in Pharaoh Cooper, because I feel like you can do a lot with any of these guys.
I mean, the biggest issue with Bird is that he's so small. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't draft him. Although I see where his value is, but he just isn't very projectable. I don't know how sort of consistent he would be in the NFL. Now, one guy who I think could do the same thing that he does, the Iowa, is Kevontae Martin Manley, who impressed me a lot this year. Just makes plays every time he gets the ball. He's somebody who I think will stick as a special teamer somewhere. He's very good.
There's so many good receivers. I see.
I mean,
every
it's
time. Every time I look at more receivers, I'm like, man, this guy's better. This guy's better. This guy's better.
But my one thing that I would say to everyone who's sort of like a scouting receivers, there are a lot of receivers who can get open and who can make plays after the catch and whatnot. But what I would just do is when you're watching receivers, I would think of like pro receivers and just think, is there something that this guy who I'm watching is doing better than the top receiver on my favorite team or the top receiver that I would consider? Because I think that sometimes we get sort of blinded by like, oh, he's making a lot of catches, or oh, he can get open on the fly route. Yeah, these are against crappy college quarterbacks. They're not very good. But like, if you see something like in his physical actual game where you're like, wow, not every receiver can get that low in their break. Wow, not every receiver has that kind of footwork. Wow, not every receiver could like accelerate like that. The receivers from the ones who actually have talent. I think there are a lot of mediocre receivers who sort of get a free pass because they're big or they have good hands or they got a lot of yards in college.
Speaking of guys who have talent, whatever happened to Bucky Jones Jr.?
He's at Fordham.
He's at Fordham? Because I knew he had transferred away from Connecticut a couple years ago.
He went with them when Pasqualoni came. He went to Fordham. Now, one player who we haven't talked about at all, who is interesting to me is Austin Hill from Arizona. He's someone who I think could be pretty good. I would have an early day 3 grade on him right now. And then at the Senior Bowl, there are a bunch of small school guys. Desmond Lewis from Central Arkansas. I've heard good things about it, although I wasn't that impressed when I watched him. So I guess maybe get to see him live. Donatello Luckett from Harding. I'm excited to see him in person because I haven't seen anything from him.
Oh, right. I forgot they've already got the team set up, too.
Yeah.
So, ascending, descending. All right.
There's a lot of these smaller guys, and I haven't been able to see them, so I'm excited to actually see them.
Well, they've only got a couple guys who officially accepted, but they've got like Drez Anderson, Jamison Crowder at wide receiver, and then that's on the North team. On the South team, they have no wide receivers.
Really? I thought all those guys accepted. Maybe it was from the Shrine game.
Yeah, it might be the Shrine game. Let me look at the accepted invites, because this might be a little bit easier. There we go. Desmond Lewis from Central Arkansas, Devontae Davis out of UNLV. That was a guy that I watched last year when I was watching it was Colorado State versus UNLV. I forget what bowl it was, and I saw Capri Bibbs on one side, and I saw this guy, Devontae Davis, on the other. And then he kind of disappeared this year, but he was a very good receiver last year.
I thought they played Washington State last year, but I remember watching that game.
I saw both the UNLV, no, it was UNLV and North Texas. It was an awful game. That's all I remember. I remember seeing Devontae Davis and going, man, I want to see more of him. And then seeing everything else and going, I wish this game would end. Harmon
really likes Devontae Davis. So, I'm intrigued. I like what I saw.
Devontae Davis?
Matt Harmon.
Oh, yeah. And then, actually, pretty much every guy we've talked about so far, Vince Mail, Ty Montgomery, Philip Dorsett, Justin Hardy, Rashad Green, hell, Sammy Coates is at the Senior Bowl, Jamison Crowder, Kevin White, Lockett, Devontae Davis, and then I haven't seen any of Desmond Lewis because it's tough to get Central Arkansas film. Drez Anderson, haven't seen any of him, so I'm not going to comment on a guy I haven't watched. Donatello Luckett out of Harding, again, Division II school. I don't watch a lot of them, so it's going to be my first exposure to him. Tony Lippett out of Michigan State, I'm not seeing why he got invited to the Senior Bowl over a couple
He's really good. I'm a fan.
He was what?
I really like him. I like him a lot.
You like Lippett?
Yeah, I like Lippett. He's basically made Connor Cook look good this year, from what I've seen.
He's who?
He's made Connor Cook look good.
Oh, okay. Who would you say your comparison is for him? Because I'm struggling on that one.
LaFell.
LaFell? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I could see it. I'm not a huge fan of Brandon LaFell.
I'm good with comparisons now. But no, LaFell actually, he's been a lot better this year than he was in Carolina.
That's right, because he's got Tom Brady throwing it to him.
No, but also he gained 10 pounds of muscle, and now he's just breaking tackles everywhere. It's insane. He's turned into Montgomery, kind
of. Okay.
Pretty much. He's been a beast.
See, I'm excited for the safety play in this year's game because I think there's a lot of good safeties. And they've got my favorite name out there. Jaquiski Tartt, Samford University. The All Key and Peele team name, he's got the best. Who names their kid Jaquiski?
I got nothing else for the receivers.
All right.
We covered all of them.
Next week, we've got to pick a new side.
We're doing tackles.
I want to say we chose edge rushers.
I thought we were doing tackles.
Because I thought we were doing edge rush. We're going offense, defense every week. Remember?
Okay. Well, I'm cool with edge rushers.
So next week, edge rushers, which will bring us back to more Senior Bowl conversation, because there are some good ones.
And my number one guy is someone who apparently nobody else has number one in this class, which is kind of crazy. So we'll talk about that next week.
I really hope you're not going to say Oakman.
Well, no, it's not Oakman. But Oakman is an edge rusher to me. And we'll talk about why I think people are miscasting him next week.
And that's fair. In a week, we will see y'all at 10 o'clock. Hey, New Year's Day. All right. New Year's Day, 10 o'clock. We'll have the Edge Rusher Spectacular, my favorite position. Even though I think this might be yours, Ethan.
I love wide receivers, but also I like cornerbacks. That's my favorite.
It's because it's also your best.
Yeah. So, anyway, good night.
It is your best, let's be honest. And that's not saying anything bad. It's just it's your best spot. Like my best spot is edge rusher.
Yeah, I see that. I just know cornerbacks. So, see you later. Good night.
All right.
Merry Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas to all of those listening to us tonight. And if you see it in the future, I hope your Christmas was very good.